It appears that there was a miscommunication, ma'am. Flight attendant Emily Carter made an effort to be kind, but her tone came off as patronizing. To give a VIP traveler priority, we need you to relocate. Senior Platinum members and other special clients are frequently the only ones allowed to use this seat. Michelle Obama, the former U.S. First Lady, was standing behind Emily, looking dapper in a navy blue coat. She glanced at Karoline Leavitt, who was sitting in 2A, the seat that the staff had reserved for Michelle. One of the passengers, who was obviously a Democrat, said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "That's Michelle Obama." Michelle didn't say anything. On this plane, she ought to be assigned to the top seat. For a moment, Caroline looked up, perplexed. She had paid in full, booked her ticket in advance via Patriot Air's system, complied with all instructions, and got to the gate on schedule. Being a platinum member of the airline, she found it incomprehensible that occupying this seat was being viewed as a problem that required attention. Before you begin, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the newest tales, and to leave a comment indicating where you are seeing the article. Calmly, she reached into her purse and pulled out her membership card. "I'm a platinum member," she declared in a solemn, commanding voice. "When I made my reservation, this seat was also assured." Emily's jaw tensed. Her expression briefly changed from surprise to satisfaction. Looking to Michelle Obama, Emily remarked, "I understand, ma'am. However, this seat is usually reserved for a highly important traveler who comes on our flights often." A few travelers started to pay attention. Others held out their phones to record the action. Rumors circulated that Caroline was a Trump supporter due to her connections to the prior president's administration. The staff was unaware that the airline would face harsh criticism for this seemingly straightforward tactic. Karoline Leavitt wasn't your typical traveler. Patriot Air's federal transportation contracts were influenced by the 27-year-old White House press secretary. Today, she was traveling to New York to speak at a national media conference about the media's role in a divisive political era. She selected seat 2A since it was roomy enough for her to work comfortably for the Washington, D.C. to New York trip. Given that its first-class tickets cost more than many people's monthly rent, Patriot Air is a symbol of opulence. Caroline and the other platinum members benefited from it. Delicious champagne, warm towels, and chairs that turned into luxurious beds. Under the gleaming facade, Patriot Air was beset by internal strife, an antiquated reservation system, subpar customer service, and the pressing need to land formal government transportation contracts to support its finances. Emily Carter, a flight attendant with 8 years of experience, took great delight in serving well-known first-class guests today. Given the backing of several people who shared her political views, she thought it was the proper decision to award the seat to Michelle Obama. "Ma'am, maybe you'd feel more at ease in another area," Emily said, leaning closer to Caroline. Her voice was straightforward but kind. Caroline glanced up from revising her speech on her iPad. "I'm sorry," she said peacefully. "Since I have to get ready for my conference, I decided to utilize this chair as my workplace." Michelle Obama did not step in and maintained her neutrality. However, a passenger in the vicinity spoke loudly enough. "On this journey, I generally picture Miss Obama in this seat. Her seat is nearly ready." The situation became more tense. A few people began creating videos. Emily hesitated, glanced between Caroline and Michelle. One of the tourists, posing as a social activist, approached Emily and said, "Thank you for handling this. We'll make sure Patriot Air is recognized on social media." That promise of public backing, even without funding, made Emily flush, and she nodded slightly. A rather simple dispute over a seat abruptly transformed into a celestial depiction of political discrimination. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin grew oppressive. With the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention, cabin supervisor David Lawson strolled toward seat 2A. He stood straight with a professional expression on his face. David said, "Ma'am, we need you to move to prioritize a VIP passenger." Enough for nearby passengers to hear clearly. It seemed as though he wasn't asking. It was a directive. When Caroline looked up from her iPad, her eyes were calm, yet a little worn out. When I showed her my ticket and platinum card, she responded in a level voice, "I have verified that I am seated here." David's lips made a little movement. He leaned down and spoke in a lower, but clearly patronizing tone. As if speaking to someone who needed to be corrected, He underlined each sentence. Perhaps you're not familiar with how our airline operates. Priority is granted to passengers who have exceptional influence. Some of the passengers began to shake their heads. Inside the cabin, curiosity gave way to unease. A businesswoman across the aisle stealthily raised her phone and recorded the entire occurrence on tape, which would become viral within hours. Michelle Obama stood in the aisle with an elegant purse, remaining neutral and refusing to intervene. Her silence, though, did little to ease the strain. A frustrated traveler's voice rose. "After we land, I have an important meeting," she added, glancing at her watch. "For Miss Obama, this spot is essential." "This is ridiculous," she said, which made Karoline feel even more tense. They whispered, "She's a Trump person," another said. "Does not deserve the job." David, encouraged by the subliminal encouragement, stepped closer, his voice low enough to sound private. But in the quiet cabin, everyone could hear. "Either this can be readily corrected, or it will have to harden." The menace hung heavy in the air. Everyone's attention was on Karoline. When her eyes met David's, they were as steely as steel. She stated, "I'm not moving," in a quiet but firm tone. "This is my seat, I've confirmed." 6 simple sentences encapsulated a brilliant choice. With his cheeks flaming, David halted, got to his feet, straightened his tie, and hurried to the front of the cottage. He seemed displeased when he took up the service phone. They had drawn the line. The appearance of a routine aircraft in the sky was abruptly marred by the signs of a political conflict. There was tension in the cabin. As they looked at one another, a number of individuals were frantically texting on their phones and posting about the occurrence on social media. Karoline went back to her iPad and resumed editing her speech as if nothing had occurred. It was 5 minutes later. The door of the cockpit opened. Michael Bennett, the captain, emerged. His eyes were pierced with experience, and his face was old. David and Emily Carter stood behind him, still in a distressed mood. It was clear from the captain's presence that this was more than a disagreement over seats. This intervention was at a high level. Michael paused next to seat 2A. "Ma'am, I've been informed there's an issue," he added in a stern, authoritative manner. With 3 airline employees standing in front of her, Karoline said, "My crew has the authority to reassign seats to ensure convenience and comfort for all passengers." Even though there were 3 people standing and 1 seated, she maintained her composure. She added in a confident, clear voice, "With all due respect, Captain, I have a platinum membership and my ticket has been validated. The workplace is the reason I picked this seat. Just because someone else wants my reserve seat doesn't mean I have to give it up." Every word she said had a harsh edge, as though she were speaking from a White House platform, even though she didn't talk loudly. Despite the quiet, everyone in the cabin knew that the battle was far from done. Patriot Air Cabin Supervisor David Lawson seemed to have all the cards in his face as he stood erect. Because of his icy tone, he interrupted, saying, "Ma'am, if you continue to be uncooperative, he would have to ask you to exit the aircraft." The threat hit like a punch, and Karoline Leavitt arched an eyebrow. She had never before displayed surprise during the altercation. "Are you threatening to remove me just for not giving up my legally booked seat?" she said calmly, but with a touch of disbelief. The question lingered in the air, with an unquestionable implication. How is it ethical to terminate a person for holding their reserved seat? Before Captain Michael Bennett could reply, a neighboring traveler who had favored giving Michelle Obama priority interrupted in a passionate, high-pitched voice. "This is outrageous," she remarked. "One of the nation's idols is Miss Obama. Never have I witnessed such awful service." The irony of her remarks caused other people to look at her with curiosity. Captain Michael may have grown more assertive because he thought things were getting out of control. "This is your final warning," he stated firmly. "If you don't move, we'll call security," Karoline said, carefully taking her phone out of her coat pocket. She launched the camera app, took steady steps, and started recording. The camera focused on the 3 airline workers in front of her while she talked aggressively. She went on, "I want to clarify what's happening." David Lawson's face distorted in rage as he lost his calm, adding, "I'm being threatened with removal from the flight for not giving up my booked seat to another passenger just because they want it." Putting aside his professional manner, he groped for Karoline's phone. He exclaimed, "You're not allowed to film," and nearly touched her gadget with his palm. Karoline stared at David and hastily grabbed the phone away. David was startled by her legal expertise when she said calmly but firmly, "In fact, there's no federal law prohibiting filming on a plane unless it interferes with crew duties. I'm only recording to protect my rights." He was clearly unprepared for this resistance, as his eyes clouded as he removed his hand. Two airport security guards entered the aircraft, and heavy footsteps reverberated throughout the cabin, signaling a point of no return. David led them resolutely down the aisle and directly to Karoline's seat. As everyone's attention was drawn to the fight, the first-class cabin became silent, and the sound of the plane's engines seemed to fade. Despite her embarrassment in front of the crowd, Karoline remained seated with her back straight and her face serene. She was holding her phone on her lap, still filming. Karoline acknowledged the first security guard's arrival with a little nod, but she remained composed when he remarked, "Ma'am, we've been informed of a situation requiring you to leave the aircraft. I'd like to know the specific airline policy I violated," she said clearly and calmly, adding, "I have a platinum membership and a legitimate ticket, and I'm sitting in my reserved seat." Clearly knowing that they had been called in to remove someone who had not broken any regulations, the two police officers exchanged anxious looks. In response to Karoline's inquiry, the second officer responded, "Ma'am, please gather your belongings and come with us." She turned to face Captain Michael, who was walking a few steps away, with David Carter and Emily at his heels. Her firm tone forced Michael to confront the truth as she asked, "Am I being removed for refusing to give up my legally booked seat?" Captain Michael Bennett responded in a halting tone, "You're being asked to leave for causing a disturbance." Even as he said it, the term disruption sounded unconvincing. Another passenger, who was also filming, whispered to their neighbor, "This is blatant political bias." Others, aware of the unfairness, nodded. An older man in the second row shook his head disapprovingly as a young woman in the back silently wiped away her tears as she watched the injustice, and Karoline began gathering her belongings with unflinching dignity, shutting down her tablet and putting her speech materials in a leather briefcase before slowly getting up. One traveler who had argued for Michelle Obama to be given priority was unable to hide their smugness and muttered, "Serves her right," loud enough to be heard. "Trump's people don't belong in that seat." Michelle Obama's face remained expressionless as she stood in the aisle, neither pleased nor disapproving. Despite the talk, Karoline was obliged to depart with the manner of someone who has experienced injustice and understands how to preserve their dignity. Head held high, back straight, eyes forward. One especially critical moment was when she passed the row that David Lawson was watching over, and a passenger's camera recorded it. "She didn't do anything wrong." Another added, "I'm recording everything." She stated first class needs standards, and her politically noxious implications are spreading like a dark fog. "Thank you for taking care of this," the aforementioned self-described social warrior muttered to David. "We'll make sure Patriot Air gets internet recognition." Local telephones amply recorded the promise of public support, if not money. "I was removed off the plane, but they chose the wrong person to humiliate." After such an incident, many individuals may become afraid, ashamed, or upset, but Karoline, a skilled strategist, maintained her composure. As Karoline and the two security officers exited the aircraft, Karoline took out her phone. She quickly tapped the computer to create a message for her trusty White House advisor, Sarah Mitchell. She whispered gently but firmly into the phone, "It's Karoline. Sarah, please get the legal and media teams together right once. In a blatant instance of political discrimination, I was just ejected from a flight." The two security guards, who were still standing close by, started to appear uncomfortable. As one read the incident report on a tablet, their initial confidence waned. As he read the facts, his expression became more and more irate. "Ma'am," he murmured hesitantly as he walked up, "I believe there might have been a miscommunication. Some of the passenger comments contradict the report's claim that you caused a disturbance." Karoline put her phone down and stared at him with her sharp eyes. "Yes, there was a misunderstanding," the woman said. "Not on my part, though. Despite having a valid ticket and a guaranteed seat, I was forced to give it up for another traveler due to bias. I was made to leave when I refused." The security officer stopped and looked at his colleague, who had moved aside, maybe to prevent the incident. They were aware that they had been lured into something unrelated to safety or security. He apologized for the inconvenience and promptly withdrew with his colleague each week. Karoline continued to capture the whole encounter on her phone, capturing every word exchange and subtlety of body language she saw. Her tone was calm and composed, as one might expect from someone who has handled communications under pressure. Karoline recognized the young woman sitting across from her in first class, holding her luggage tightly and using her phone in the other hand, as she cautiously walked forward while recording. "Miss Leavitt," the woman said on Karoline's behalf, her voice shaking with anger. "I couldn't sit idly by after what happened, so I left the plane." She showed Karoline the clear video on her phone, including the moment a passenger in the media pledged to help the crew. "This is obviously political bias," she added, her eyes welling with tears. "I recorded everything from the moment the flight attendant asked you to give up your seat to when you were forced to leave." The young woman promised to deliver the unedited footage right away and volunteered to testify if necessary. Karoline Leavitt's eyes and voice were genuine as she remarked, "You need this tape," her face softening, for the first time since the event started. She also added, "Thank you. This will be very helpful." The fact that the film would soon be seen by millions of people, shaking Patriot Air and causing a media frenzy, was unknown to Karoline and the other passengers on the aircraft. As press secretary for the White House, Karoline had already started preparing to utilize this evidence to pursue justice, contacting her media and legal teams to craft a strong reaction. However, another scene was happening on the plane. Emily Carter, who knew Karoline's identity but chose to comply with political pressure, brought a complimentary glass of champagne and bowed differently. Michelle Obama, who had not requested the seat but had been given priority by the crew due to pressure from a group of passengers, took seat 2A with a calm expression that showed neither satisfaction nor discomfort. In the galley out of the passengers' line of sight, Emily and David Lawson exchanged knowing looks, and David muttered, "Thanks to her, we'll get praised online," in reference to the passengers' promise of media support. Emily's voice was full of reverence as she said, "We're so sorry for the disruption, Miss Obama. We want to ensure your flight is perfect. You have committed a grave error." Panic made the manager's voice waver. "Why did this happen when you knew who the passenger was?" The crew's radio abruptly buzzed with an urgent message from Patriot Air's administrative staff as Emily, David, and Captain Michael Bennett exchanged glances, their faces pallid, their sense of control gone. Although they had been aware of Karoline's identity from the beginning, they gave Michelle Obama priority due to pressure from passengers and a need to avoid criticism from left-leaning media. As they became aware that what had appeared to be a straightforward event had escalated into a crisis that threatened the airline, panic began to creep in. At Patriot Air's top-floor offices in Arlington, Virginia, with its glistening glass walls, CEO Robert Harrison was looking over quarterly financial reports when his phone called. "Sir, we're in a serious situation. A video is going viral, showing Karoline Leavitt being removed from this morning's flight." Laura Evans, the public relations director, said in an internal call. Robert first frowned apathetically. "Laura, passengers are frequently ejected for causing disruptions." "No, sir," Laura said in a strained voice. But the crew understood who she was and, at the request of several passengers, forced her to give up her seat for Michelle Obama, even though White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt wasn't making any trouble. This is not the same thing. Patriot Air was negotiating. "Send me the video now," he said, trembling, knowing that this mistake may cause the airline to fail. They are shown in the film accepting a pledge that the prejudice will be supported by the media. Given that Karoline was a strong woman who had direct control over government official transportation contracts, Robert's face went colorless as he grasped the repercussions. Karoline Leavitt's unjust treatment, the crew's acceptance of a passenger's pledge of media assistance, and her dignified poise throughout her removal were all captured on camera. As he watched the film on the TV, Robert Harrison's look shifted from one of worry to one of fear. Harrison remarked, "This was a public relations disaster unfolding." The room fell silent when Laura Evans responded, "Yes, sir, it's Karoline Leavitt." Robert repeated, "Karoline Leavitt," in a voice that was nearly audible, and Laura shuddered as she nodded over the phone. The White House press secretary. "Have we located the traveler?" Robert cried, even though he knew the answer in his heart. Within 20 minutes of Caroline's message, her dependable assistant, Sarah Mitchell, took the White House communications director and top legal counsel to the Reagan National Airport VIP lounge, where she sat with a rapidly assembling team. She is in charge of the administration's communications and has direct control over the official government transportation contracts that we are negotiating. The communications director flipped the screen to show the rapidly increasing numbers and declared that the video had received 2 million views. The topic is trending on social media and being covered by major news outlets. The air was charged with focused energy, phones were ringing nonstop, and laptops were open. The social media staff at Patriotaire's Arlington, Virginia headquarters was in a crisis. After years of collaboration, Karoline and Sarah exchanged a look of mutual understanding. Caroline's voice was full of cynicism as she said, "They knew exactly who I was." Nevertheless, they chose to give Miss Obama precedence due to political pressure, without thinking about the consequences. There was silence in the room as Robert Harrison stood with his leadership team, their faces white, evaluating the damage. "Sir," said Robert's assistant, holding a phone, "Miss Lee's office would want to speak with you directly." Robert took a deep breath and tried to remain calm before answering the phone. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt said, "I want to offer our deepest apologies for the unacceptable incident this morning." Robert nodded, his face darkening. "Leave it," he whispered, trying to sound conciliatory despite his tight voice. "Hold on," the chief financial officer said, anxiously going through documents. The executives realized how big of a mistake they had made and looked at each other in fear as Caroline's clear, quiet voice came over the speaker. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison, for agreeing to speak. Despite knowing who I was, the crew decided to be biased due to political pressure. Today's incident seriously calls into question Patriot Air's credibility because the airline negotiates federal contracts. Beyond personal grievances, political prejudice is depicted in the video, endangering the airline's reputation with the government." Karoline persisted in her uncompromising tone, saying, "I'm requesting an urgent meeting with Patriot Air's leadership today." The emergency meeting was called in a record amount of time. The boardroom was tense as everyone waited for the woman who now held Patriot's future in her hands. However, as soon as Karoline Leavitt walked in, the atmosphere changed abruptly, and everyone stopped talking and stared at her. Some board members were still dressed for golf, while others were obviously leaving family gatherings. Karoline was wearing the same blue suit she had on when she was taken off the plane, which served as a subtle but potent reminder of what had happened that morning. Despite her public humiliation, Karoline exuded the composed confidence of someone who understood her own worth and power. She was accompanied by Sarah Mitchell, the chief legal counsel and communications specialist who would be instrumental in the impending reforms. The video started to play with startling clarity as Robert used a remote control to turn on the big screen in front of the room and dim the lights. They recorded every second of it, including the first altercation, Captain Michael Bennett's feeble defenses, David Lawson's patronizing demeanor despite knowing Karoline was a high-ranking official, and, most damning of all, the passengers' promise of media support in exchange for bias. CEO Robert Harrison cleared his throat and looked pale as he began, saying, "Leavitt," his voice trembling, "we would like to express our heartfelt regret for the unsuitable treatment you endured today." The boardroom fell silent as the video ended, with Karoline Leavitt sitting across from the board with intimidating tranquility, and some members unable to look her in the eye. The tone Karoline used was calm but firm. "Patriotic values are not reflected in this behavior, and I'm not interested in apologizing," she stated. The boardroom was stunned by her directness. The board members squirmed nervously in their leather seats when they realized that the standard corporate damage control methods would not be sufficient. "I have one option and two requests," Karoline went on to say. "First, all crew members, Captain Michael Bennett, Emily Carter, and David Lawson, must be put on immediate leave until the matter is investigated. Secondly, I will recommend to the administration that we look into the official government transportation contract with Patriotaire." Robert glanced to the board members, his gaze tense. "Miss Leavitt," he continued, attempting to appear accommodating, "we can see your annoyance, but maybe a brief suspension would be adequate instead of taking harsh measures. We have union agreements, and these workers have years of service. Karoline put her hands on the table and continued to look at Robert. This is not a negotiation, she said. If you don't take responsibility, the multi-million-dollar federal contract you're pursuing will be seriously jeopardized. Or I'll make sure the Department of Transportation conducts a thorough inquiry into Patriot Air's activities. Her words lingered in the air with indisputable weight. Patriot Air would go bankrupt and fall behind rivals if it lost the government contract. Abruptly, the boardroom door sprang open. A young financial expert who had clearly hurried from another floor rushed in, disregarding all etiquette. He handed Robert a tablet while panting. Sir, our stock price is being impacted by the news of the incident. We're down 12% and continuing losing. Economists predict a 30% decline by the end of the day if we don't act quickly. Robert looked at the iPad, then back at Karoline. The truth is beginning to set in. It was more than a disagreement. There was an existential threat to Patriot Air. The woman they had taken off the aircraft now held the airline's future. 3 stories below, in an unadorned conference room, Michael Bennett, David Lawson, and Emily Carter sat in uneasy silence. Even though they had been summoned without warning, the group was already uneasy due to rumors that were going around. Ellen Brooks, the HR director, came on time, escorted by 2 security guards and the airline's legal counsel, who were waiting quietly at the door. Security was frequently absent from disciplinary proceedings and performance appraisals. It meant something far more grave. I'll be honest, Ellen said. There are 3 similar folders on the table. Patriot Air has terminated your employment contracts with immediate effect. The remark was a gut punch. Emily put her palm over her lips and smothered a sob. David's wrath surged and he frowned. Michael just closed his eyes, his craggy face suddenly looking decades older. It was David who said, "We're sorry. All we did was respond to passenger demand. Miss Leavitt's stubbornness made it difficult for us to set things up." Ellen turned her laptop toward them and opened it, but she didn't warm up. The iconic video began to play. David's disdain was evident, despite his knowledge that Karoline was a senior official. Michael was obviously evading responsibilities, and Emily was obviously uneasy. The most blatant example of political prejudice was the passengers' pledge of media assistance. Ellen gave them a direct glance. "You call this pressure," she said nonchalantly. "You knew exactly who Karoline Leavitt was, but you wanted another passenger for publicity and political pressure." However, what happened next left David Lawson numb. The video captured the moment when a passenger whispered to David that they would back Patriot Air in the media if they preferred her, despite Michelle Obama's efforts to talk discreetly. She also mentioned respecting standards. Therefore, as part of etiquette, they accepted a passenger's pledge of preference in return for partiality. The HR director, Ellen Brooks, asked in a voice too piercing for a justification. With tears running down her cheeks, Emily Carter broke down. "We made a terrible mistake," she remarked, admitting her error. Captain Michael Bennett, who had successfully negotiated actual storms during his career, appeared incapable of handling this one. "I knew it was wrong as it was happening, but I didn't stop it," he said weakly. "I trusted the crew's judgment." "I wasn't there when the first fight broke out." Ellen stared them in the eye and spoke forcefully. "You failed to fulfill your obligations to the business and to fundamental human rights today." Emily's tears increased. David's cheeks had been flushed with anger, but now they were pale. Michael bowed his head, unable to speak. Ellen proceeded on in a chilly tone. "You will be led to collect your personal belongings and leave the premises. Your last paycheck, which is already very generous in this instance, will include 2 weeks of severance. The humiliation Karoline had endured earlier was repeated for Emily, David, and Michael as they were escorted out of the room. Like a severe lesson in justice, the symmetry was flawless and vicious. At the same time, a surprising revelation was made to hundreds of workers in Patriot Air's largest auditorium. White House employee Karoline Leavitt stood on each side of CEO Robert Harrison. The auditorium remained silent as Robert continued, saying, "Today, Patriot Air failed a passenger in the most serious way." Karoline took the initiative to outline the next steps, her voice bearing the weight of both first-hand knowledge and official authority. "This failure is not just an isolated incident, but a symptom of systemic issues we must address immediately and comprehensively. Karoline went on, looking around the auditorium. This isn't just about punishing those involved. Workers listened in quiet, with some hanging their heads in shame at what had occurred in the company's name, and many nodding in agreement. The goal is to change patriot culture from the ground up. What happened today was wrong, not because I work as the White House press secretary, but because it would be improper whether I were a teacher, a doctor, or a student returning home. Patriot Air will suspend all operations for 48 hours beginning tomorrow to implement the first phase of our training program to demonstrate our commitment to change. Robert's statement was a turning point, and the auditorium exploded in applause. Every flight, every route, every service will pause. In the aviation industry, where every minute of delay costs thousands of dollars, the 48-hour suspension was unprecedented. Patriot Air experienced the most significant change in its 30-year history in the weeks that followed, turning meeting spaces across the U.S. into training facilities and rearranging flight schedules to guarantee that all staff members, from baggage handlers to CEO Robert Harrison, took part in required anti-bias training. Millions of dollars would be lost by the airline, but the message of dedication to change was priceless. Karoline Leavitt directly participated in several training sessions when she stood in front of staff members, some of whom were skeptics or defensive. "This is your chance to be part of the solution," she said, her voice bearing the weight of her personal experience. It was not the cheesy corporate training that employees were used to disregarding. Rather, it was demanding, difficult, and sometimes uncomfortable. Every day, people who don't have the same power or platform as me go through what I did. Today, we start to transform it. Some were transformed by her presence. By giving it a human face, leadership may have downplayed the situation as a PR concern. Others claimed that despite the brutality she experienced, her willingness to engage in dialogue demonstrated that she was more interested in real change than retribution. Outside of Patriot's business shell, the repercussions were still being felt. In the digital age, Michael Bennett, Emily Carter, and David Lawson found that responsibility follows you. Their names and faces became symbols of political discrimination in the aviation sector, where prestige is worth money. Emails from other airlines that had turned him down were all around David as he sat in his Arlington apartment. "Although we value your experience, we have selected another candidate." The nice phrases did not hide the truth. No one wanted to hire the man in the viral video. Emily had similar rejections, each of which provided more proof that her 8-year career might be ended by a single poor decision. Her attitude changed when the recruiter saw her during a potential interview. "You are the flight attendant who engaged in that instance of prejudice, aren't you?" The interview ended shortly after that. Michael Bennett had worked in aviation for 30 years, yet he couldn't get even a low-level position. His distinguished career was reduced to a few instances of poor judgment when he failed to stand up for what was right. There were consequences for the traveler who promised to assist the crew in the media as well. Not just her favorite airline was impacted. Patriot Air permanently barred her from traveling. She sat in her living room and watched national news outlets discuss her behavior. Her employer put her on administrative leave while they investigated her actions. In order to avoid being associated with the one who was branded as the discriminatory traveler on social media, friends pulled away. For the first time, she might have had to deal with the real consequences of her politically biased actions. However, Patriot Air changed its stance in a big way. New regulations established a zero-tolerance policy for political bias, revamped seat dispute processes, and protected employees who reported misconduct. The staff handbook was updated to explicitly state that accepting any enticement from passengers in exchange for preferential treatment would lead to immediate termination. Passengers noticed the shift almost instantly. Brief interviews conducted at boarding gates and baggage claim areas revealed a shifting outlook. A regular traveler claims that the personnel is now more respectful to everyone. "It always felt like there was an invisible hierarchy based on your political preferences before now. The transformation was not perfect nor instantaneous." Real change seldom occurs. But week by week, Patriot Air gradually became the airline it had always advertised as, one that treated every passenger with respect. One of Patriot Air's frequent passengers commented at the Reagan National Airport gate, "It used to look like there was an invisible hierarchy based on one's political beliefs or physical attributes. Another passenger said, "I had an issue with my seat once, but they addressed it professionally. Without letting anyone feel left out, they devised a solution that pleased everyone." Independent auditors verified the changes, which were installed by Patriot X under the watchful eye of White House spokesperson Karoline Leavitt. The airline's stock price began to increase once more, despite the fact that the journey was still long. Patriot Air revamped their hiring procedures with diversity programs that address the core issues of inclusion and representation, going beyond token gestures. The transformation was not perfect nor instantaneous. Real change seldom occurs, but week after week, Patriot Air gradually changed into the airline it had depicted in its advertisements, a place where all passengers, regardless of their political beliefs, were treated fairly. 6 months after the incident that nearly caused the airline to fail, Patriot Air not only survived, but thrived. In addition to rebounding, there was a 12% rise in passenger volume. Employee satisfaction reached an all-time high. The poison culture was exposed and began to heal after years of festering in silence. The biggest surprise came on a damp Tuesday morning when Karoline Leavitt announced a new initiative through a White House-backed fund. The Second Chance program was designed specifically for those who lost their jobs due to instances of bias and offers comprehensive retraining and a path back to employment. Karoline stressed the need of unity and made it clear that responsibility did not mean life in hell during the program's press launch. It is giving people the opportunity to own up to their mistakes and try to do better. We cannot build a more just society unless we provide them a path forward. Among the first to join the program were Emily Carter, David Lawson, and Michael Bennett. The journey was not simple. The training had them confront hard truths about themselves and acknowledge the impact of their actions on Karoline and many others who faced discrimination without being able to defend themselves. David, who was first the most resistant, underwent the most profound change. In group discussions, he discussed his background and the acceptance of political discrimination. "I never thought I was biased," he commented at one especially moving session. "Since I didn't openly criticize anyone, I thought I was a great man. This event taught me how subtle bias can be, even when we aren't conscious of it." The central topic of Emily's search was moral courage, or the willingness to speak up even if doing so results in losing one's job. With trembling voice, she stated, "I knew what was happening was wrong, but I was afraid I may lose my job if I questioned the captain or David. I now see that I was complicit in my silence." Michael, the oldest of the three, had the most difficult journey. Decades of belief that he treated everyone equally were called into question by what happened that day. "I trusted the wrong thing," he thought. "I prioritized hierarchy over people. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make things right." Emily and David began seeking for entry-level positions at various airlines after receiving their program requirements. Their stories were now included on their resumes as background information for their personal growth rather than as excuses. Some companies believed the accreditation demonstrated a commitment to progress, even though it didn't make up for past mistakes. Emily was the first person to work as a ground crew member for a small airline. The pay was far less than at Patriot Air, though. Despite the harder work and longer hours, it was a second chance that she had previously thought was impossible. David continued, starting off as a baggage handler for another carrier. Due to his advanced age, Michael decided against going back to work in commercial aviation. Instead, he assisted with education through the Second Chance program, which gave him a new purpose: to help others understand the consequences of making mistakes like his own. Patriot Air moved on with its reform by enacting new regulations that ensure fairness and professionalism. Better service free from political bias was noted by passengers. Emily Carter was the first to get a new job, and David Lawson, who handled luggage for a different airline rather than as a flight attendant, followed her a month later. He saw the challenging assignment as a launching pad for a career comeback. Due to his age and experience, Michael Bennett was unable to resume commercial flying, but the Second Chance program gave him a new purpose in instructing. By helping people understand the consequences of making poor decisions like the one he did, he turned his personal failure into a lesson for the whole community. Patriot Air changed drastically. Independent auditors confirmed what passengers had already seen. Now the airline led the industry in customer satisfaction across all demographics. For the first time, travelers of all political stripes reported service experiences that were either better or comparable to their prior ones. A standard that should have been met long ago, but was unheard of in the industry. In a private meeting at Patriotaire's offices in Arlington, Virginia, Karoline Leavitt sat across from CEO Robert Harrison and reviewed the company's 6-month success report. She closed the folder with the latest statistics, her piercing gaze softened by a hint of contentment. The words, "You've shown real change," came out calmly. "That deserves recognition," Robert replied, and he nodded. The tension of the past several months is evident in the new wrinkles on his face. "It hasn't been easy," he murmured quietly, "but it was necessary. What happened to you that day forced us to confront issues that we had been putting off for years." In a fairly philosophical tone, Karoline stated, "This is how change often happens. It's not via easy, but through confrontation." They stood with both hands shaking. They were partners in a revolution that not only changed an airline, but also set a new standard for the industry, rather than competitors or even close friends. This story illustrated that justice isn't always about punishment, but rather about growth. 6 months after the incident, Patriot Air not only recovered, but thrived. Passengers interviewed at airports like Reagan National and JFK revealed a significant change. "I feel more appreciated no matter who I am." Someone stated, "They actually listen, not just prioritize celebrities or those with the right politics." "I used to worry if my political beliefs would affect how I was treated," stated another. "Not anymore." The Second Chance program served as a model for other industries and encouraged accountability and advancement. Even though they started off in less important roles, Emily, David, and Michael soon gained their self-confidence back. Emily, who was now working at a small airport, began to win the respect of her colleagues for her integrity and diligence. Even though shifting bags was physically taxing, David found satisfaction in showing off his change. By teaching others, Michael inspired others to avoid his mistakes. Their experiences showed that justice is both a punishment and an opportunity for atonement. By putting in place processes for transparent dispute resolution and protections for employees who reported misconduct, Patriot Air continued to innovate. The airline turned into a model of how a business can confront its shortcomings and overcome a crisis. In 2025, the event of Karoline Leavitt being asked to give up her VIP ticket on a Patriot Air flight to make place for Michelle Obama is proof that political discrimination and severe divide are actual issues in American society. The staff dismissed Karoline for siding with the Republican Party while choosing Michelle due to her notoriety and passenger pressure, illustrating how political beliefs may influence everyday interactions, from customer service to personal decisions. The widely shared film that revealed the injustice and Karoline's powerful response, using her political position to reform Patriot Air, highlight the power of responsibility, unity, and enacting change. Justice is more than just punishment. It's also an opportunity to apologize, as demonstrated by the Second Chance program for Emily Carter, David Lawson, and Michael Bennett, all of whom were penalized for their bigotry. The lesson is that in a divided nation like the United States today, individuals must be conscious of their political biases and treat everyone equally, regardless of affiliation. When faced with injustice, use social media or legal channels to calmly and methodically seek responsibility, like Karoline did when she sought an investigation and videotaped it. Learn from Patriot Air's example. Whatever your political stance, pay attention, make changes, and foster a community where everyone is valued. Subscribe to the channel to follow inspirational stories of justice and unity, such as Patriots and Karoline Leavitt's journey. We value your time and look forward to seeing you in the upcoming film, which will have more life-altering insights.